Nobody warned Oba Femi. Nobody pulled him aside and said, listen, there are certain lines in this company that you do not cross, certain people whose names you do not put in your mouth, certain actions that carry consequences that no title reign and no amount of physical dominance can protect you from. Nobody told him that last week's decision was going to come back and land on him with the full destructive weight of the most legitimately terrifying human being WWE has ever put in front of a camera. And so Oba Femi walked into that arena this week with his championship and his arrogance fully intact, completely unprepared for what Brock Lesnar was about to do to him. And what Brock Lesnar did to him was not a response, it was not a retaliation, it was a demolition. It was a systematic, methodical, breathtaking act of destruction that left Oba Femi on that mat and left everyone watching wondering whether the most dominant young champion WWE has introduced in years is ever going to be the same again. Tell me in the comments right now if you think Oba Femi had any idea this was coming, because watching his face when that music hit tells a very specific story, and I want to know if you read it the same way I did. To understand what happened this week, you have to understand what happened last week in full, because the events that triggered this level of response from Brock Lesnar were not minor. They were not a miscommunication or a moment of competitive heat that got slightly out of hand. What Oba Femi did last week was a deliberate act of disrespect, directed at a man who has spent 2 decades teaching this industry what happens when you disrespect him. Oba Femi made a choice. He looked at the legend of Brock Lesnar, at the career, at the accomplishments, at the very specific and very documented history of what the Beast Incarnate does to people who give him reasons to appear, and he decided that none of it applied to him. He decided that his size and his youth and his championship and his momentum put him in a category where the normal rules of cause and effect did not operate. That decision was the most expensive decision Oba Femi has made in his professional career. Brock Lesnar does not appear on WWE television because he is scheduled. He does not show up because the calendar told him to. He appears when something has happened that requires his specific kind of response. When the universe of WWE throws something into the atmosphere that carries enough weight and enough insult to reach wherever Brock Lesnar exists between his appearances, he comes back. And the appearance is never proportional to the provocation. Brock Lesnar does not respond to disrespect with equal disrespect. He responds to disrespect with overwhelming, disproportionate, completely one-sided violence that sends a message not just to the person who provoked him, but to every single person in that locker room who might be watching and calculating whether similar behavior might be worth the risk. This week's message was received by everyone. Trivia question for the WrestlingChord community, and I want to see this answered without any help from search engines. Name 3 different championships that Brock Lesnar has held during his WWE career. Drop them in the comments right now. The setup for this week's destruction began before Brock Lesnar ever appeared on screen. Oba Femi was already in the building, already in that mode he gets into, where the championship on his shoulder and the size on his frame combine to create an atmosphere of untouchability that he genuinely seems to believe rather than simply perform. He was moving through that backstage environment with the energy of someone who had
processed last week's confrontation with Brock Lesnar and concluded that the correct lesson to take from it was that he had survived, that he was still standing, that he was still champion, that whatever Brock Lesnar represented, it was something he had encountered and come through on the other side of without losing what mattered. That reading of last week's events was catastrophically incorrect. Because Brock Lesnar had not come last week to test Oba Femi. He had not come to see what the champion was made of. He had come to deliver a first installment of something that was always going to require multiple payments. And Oba Femi, in his arrogance, in his genuine inability to fully process what it means to have Brock Lesnar's full attention directed at you, had mistaken the first installment for the complete transaction. When Lesnar's music hit this week, the reaction in that arena was different from last week. Last week there was shock, the surprise element was real, and the crowd's response carried that quality of people processing something unexpected. This week, the crowd had been carrying the anticipation of this moment since last week ended. Every person in that building knew that the story was not finished. Every person in that building had spent the days between these 2 shows thinking about what Brock Lesnar was going to do when he came back. The anticipation had been building for days, and when the music finally hit, it released in a noise that felt like pressure being relieved. The crowd did not react with surprise. They reacted with vindication. They had known this was coming, and they had come to this arena to witness it in person. Comment section question: where were you when Brock Lesnar's music hit this week, and what was your immediate physical reaction? I want the real responses. Tell me exactly what that moment felt like. Brock Lesnar came through that curtain, and the visual difference from last week was immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. Last week, he marched with purpose. This week, he moved faster. The deliberateness was still there, but underneath it was something closer to urgency, closer to anger, closer to that specific energy that Lesnar carries when the situation is not just business, but personal. Whatever Oba Femi did last week, whatever specific act it was that triggered this level of response, it had landed on Brock Lesnar in a way that went beyond professional grievance. This was not a man coming to address a competitive threat. This was a man coming to settle something that had gotten under his skin in a way that required immediate and comprehensive resolution. Oba Femi met him at the top of the ramp. That choice alone deserves analysis, because it was either the bravest or the most foolish decision the champion could have made in that moment. He did not wait in the ring. He did not hold the high ground of the squared circle and make Lesnar come to him on his terms. He walked up the ramp and put himself in Brock Lesnar's path, while Brock Lesnar was already moving with momentum and purpose, and that particular expression on his face that experienced WWE viewers know means the next several minutes are going to be very bad for whoever is on the receiving end of it. The initial collision on the ramp was the kind of physical exchange that reminded you this is a unique situation in professional wrestling. Both of these men are enormous. Both of these men hit with genuine force. When they collide, the impact registers differently than most wrestling confrontations, because the mass and the athleticism and the genuine physicality involved operates at a level above the standard. Oba Femi got hands in. He always gets hands in because he is legitimately exceptional and his instincts
are sharp even when his judgment about larger strategic decisions is questionable. He pushed back. He used his size. For approximately 30 seconds, it looked like this was going to be more competitive than anyone had anticipated. And then Brock Lesnar decided he was done with the competitive portion of the evening. Trivia for the comments section. What is the name of the pay-per-view event where Brock Lesnar famously ended The Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak, and what year did it happen? First correct answer gets acknowledged in the next video. The shift happened with a single underhook. The moment Lesnar got his grip properly established and used that freakish combination of technique and raw power to take control of the physical space between them, the dynamic of the confrontation changed completely and irrevocably. Oba Femi felt the difference immediately. You could see it in how his body responded. The confidence in his physical tools, the assurance that his size made him competitive in any exchange with any human being on this planet, encountered its specific and definitive exception in that moment on the ramp. What followed was the kind of sustained destruction that Brock Lesnar delivers when he has decided that the message needs to be comprehensive. Not a quick statement, not a single exclamation point. A paragraph, a full document of violence with a clear beginning, a brutal middle, and an ending that nobody watching could mistake for anything other than exactly what it was intended to be. The German suplex on the ramp was the moment the crowd understood the scale of what they were watching. Oba Femi, this physical marvel, this specimen who moves with that impossible combination of size and grace, went from vertical to the ramp surface via Brock Lesnar's arms, and the sound that produced from the audience was that primal noise that only comes when something genuinely jaw-dropping happens in a live setting. The ramp is unforgiving. The mat inside the ring has give to it. The ramp does not forgive. And Oba Femi learned that in real time. Lesnar did not stop. That was the detail that communicated the depth of this grievance. A message delivered and received might have been one German suplex and a stare. This was not a message being sent. This was a debt being collected.
Lesnar pulled Femi back up, and the crowd, already at a fever pitch, somehow found another level when it became clear that the first suplex was not the end of the sequence. Comment section. On a scale of 1 to 10, rate the destruction Brock Lesnar delivered this week, and be specific about which moment hit the hardest for you personally. The trip from the ramp to the ring happened in stages, and each stage had its own specific piece of damage attached to it. The ring post, the announce table, the steps. Brock Lesnar used the architecture of that ringside environment the way a craftsman uses tools, each one selected for a specific purpose, each one applied with precision rather than chaos, the overall effect being a comprehensive physical breakdown of someone who had walked to that ramp believing themselves to be untouchable. By the time both men were back inside the ring, the crowd was operating at a sustained intensity that arenas rarely reach and almost never maintain for extended periods. Usually, a crowd peaks and then comes down slightly before the next peak. This crowd had peaked and stayed there because Lesnar was not giving them a moment to breathe. Every time the action paused for even a few seconds, the crowd filled that space with noise because they understood instinctively that the pause was not the end, but simply Brock Lesnar
taking a breath before the next sequence. The F5 in the center of the ring was inevitable, and the crowd treated its arrival the way crowds treat the final chord of a song they have been waiting their whole lives to hear live. They had known it was coming from the moment Lesnar's music hit. They had watched the entire sequence of events as a build toward this specific moment. When Oba Femi went up and then came crashing down with that rotation that Lesnar has perfected over 2 decades, the noise was not surprise, it was completion. It was the sound of something being resolved that had needed resolution since last week ended. Lesnar stood over Femi, and the stillness of that image was as powerful as everything that had preceded it. The movement, the chaos, the sustained destruction, all of it culminating in this completely static image of Brock Lesnar standing over the body of the WWE champion with an expression that communicated not satisfaction, but something closer to simple finality. This was not a man who had enjoyed what he did. This was a man who had done what needed to be done and now stood in the aftermath of it without celebration or performance. Trivia, and this one is for the true students of the game. What was Brock Lesnar's amateur wrestling record at the University of Minnesota, and what major individual title did he win there? Real ones know this. Drop it below. The championship was on the mat next to Oba Femi. That visual was deliberate. The title that Femi had been carrying as a symbol of his dominance, as evidence of his untouchability, as the physical representation of everything he believed about his own position in this company, was on the same mat as his body. Brock Lesnar did not pick it up. He did not hold it over his head. He looked at it, and then he looked at Femi, and then he stepped over both of them and walked toward the ramp. That decision not to pick up the title is the most interesting creative choice in this entire segment, and I do not think enough people are talking about it. Brock Lesnar picking up the championship would have made this a title challenge. It would have framed the destruction as ambition, as a statement about wanting what Oba Femi has. By not picking it up, by walking away from it with complete indifference, Lesnar communicated something far more dangerous. He communicated that this was not about the championship, that the championship was not the point, that Oba Femi himself was the point, and the title was simply incidental to whatever this situation actually is between these two men. An opponent who wants your championship is manageable. You defend it. You have a match. There is a structure to that conflict that can be navigated. An opponent who does not care about your championship and wants something more personal, something that cannot be resolved by a simple title match, that opponent is genuinely threatening in a way that has nothing to do with the professional stakes and everything to do with something that runs deeper and darker. Oba Femi has to figure out what Brock Lesnar actually wants, and until he figures that out, he is going to keep waking up on this mat.
Final comment section question before we wrap this up, and I want genuine, thoughtful responses on this one. Do you think Oba Femi can actually beat Brock Lesnar in a one-on-one match with proper preparation and time to game plan? Or is the physical and experience gap simply too large to overcome, regardless of the circumstances? Make your argument. I want to see the full case for both sides in the comments. The larger story being built here is one of
The most compelling programs WWE has constructed around a young champion in recent memory. The formula of taking your most protected rising star and putting them in the path of the most credible destroyer in company history is not new. But the specific combination of Oba Femi's particular kind of arrogance and Brock Lesnar's particular kind of grievance creates a dynamic that feels fresh because both elements are so specifically developed. This is not generic monster versus generic challenger. This is a specific personality encountering a specific consequence, and the collision of those two specific things is producing storytelling that has genuine weight. What Oba Femi does next defines his championship reign more than any title defense he has had or will have. Coming back from 2 consecutive weeks of Brock Lesnar destruction requires a response that cannot be physical alone. He needs to show something different. He needs to find an angle, a strategy, a dimension to his character that we have not seen yet. Because if he comes back next week and tries to meet Brock Lesnar the same way he met him the last 2 weeks, the result is going to be the same, and the question of whether this program elevates Femi or permanently damages him will start being asked very loudly. The potential for this feud is enormous. The ceiling on what these two performers can produce together in a structured match with a proper build behind it is one of the most exciting things WWE has on the horizon right now. But the path to that ceiling runs directly through Oba Femi finding whatever it is inside himself that allows him to survive Brock Lesnar long enough to figure out how to beat him. If you stayed with this breakdown all the way to the end, you are exactly the fan this channel exists to serve. Share this video with every wrestling fan you know who needs to understand the full depth of what is happening in this program. Subscribe to WrestlingChord if you are not already here, and hit the notification bell because every major moment in WWE gets this level of analysis right here. Leave your hottest takes in the comments and let us build this conversation into something. Brock Lesnar is back, Oba Femi is on the mat, and nothing about what comes next is going to be simple or clean or predictable. WrestlingChord will be here for every second of it.